What's cracking, people? Back with another reaction, back with some more punk rock, and we're back with another tune from the Vandals. And as I mentioned before, I have a double album. It's sort of like a two-album compilation. In fact, I think one of them is I think Peace Thru Vandalism, maybe it was just an EP. I'm not sure, but basically it's Peace Thru Vandalism and When in Rome, Do As the Vandals. And once again, I mentioned it when I reacted to Master Race. That it's just such a clever album title. Like again, if you know the history, the Vandals were one of several Germanic groups that moved southward and conquered much of the Roman outposts and ultimately sacked Rome itself. And it was in some ways that process was seen as the end of the classical world, at least in Western Europe, and sort of depends on where you are in terms of when aspects of the ancient regime, if you will, sort of broke apart and gave way to what we refer to as the Middle Ages. But again, the sacking of Rome by the Vandals, to have an album title, When in Rome, Do As the Vandals, not as the Romans, very clever. But we're actually going to listen to a tune that's from Peace Thru Vandalism, the first album or EP on this compilation. I mentioned it when I did the reaction to Master Race also, that this is from the era when Steve-O was the lead singer. Eventually, he left the group, and I mentioned in the other video, so I won't go into detail, but there was some acrimony about the way I think he left the group, and eventually Joe Escalante, who he's been in the band since I think the very earliest days, but he's played everything. He was like the drummer, and then he was the bassist, and then eventually he was the guitarist. I think which he continues to do to this day. I think he also will occasionally do backing vocals. Dave Quackenbush came in and took over once Steve-O left. But this is the period from when Steve-O was the singer. And yeah, we're going to listen to a tune called Pirate's Life. People who know the Vandals will know this tune. It's like one of their early calling cards and one of their most famous tunes. I grew up in Southern California. I went to Disneyland a bunch as a kid. And then, in my teen years, I got into the rave scene and was going to a lot of techno parties, eventually started DJing at some of them and so on. Now, I had been going to punk shows for even, before that. Discovered punk early 94, late 93. But I didn't get, the Propaganda album, which was sort of my entree-pot into, more legitimate punk rock. Until 94. Bottom line, the point is, I got into the Vandals a couple years later. And by then, the shift to Quackenbush had already happened, but I was still catching up on their earlier material. Anyway, the point is, as a teenager, I experimented with things, and, I feel like the statute of limitations is long enough now, it's not a big deal. I did this a couple times. I went to Disneyland as a teenager, and I think maybe even once in my early 20s, where LSD 25 was employed, and I had interesting experiences, nothing remotely like this. But yeah, the story here is that he takes LSD, goes to Disneyland, goes to the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, or Caribbean. That's in Disneyland parlance, it was always Pirates of the Caribbean, but Caribbean is typically the way that word is said, internationally. Regardless, he goes on the Pirates of the Caribbean. And he basically starts interacting with the scenes as you go along in the boat as if they're real people, and he's sort of he's in two minds as to what's happening, and he's sort of terrified of what's going to happen, because there's a voice that oh, if you go down into the thing or whatever, it's bad things will happen to you. And so he's sort of responding to these things which are part of an entertainment, part of an amusement park ride, but which with not being a fully sound mind, under the influence of hallucinogen, perhaps not fully experienced in that realm, one might be inclined to take things in a more literal way. So that's sort of what the song is about. But it's it's very cheeky, and if you know the ride, at least the old school version, which is to say, I haven't been to Disneyland in many years, but my understanding is that once they came out with the the Johnny Depp and what's her name. I can't believe I'm blanking on her name, but oh man, why can't I think of her name? Basically, I forget the female lead's name, Keira Knightley. But the Johnny Depp and Keira Knightley films, I believe once those came out, Disney went all in on that, and I believe they changed the ride so that now it's essentially even if there's similar sort of scenes, it's all in reference to those movies now. So I'm thinking of the old version, which is, certainly what Steve-O and the other guys would have gone through when they went on this ride. So, like I said, this is the Vandals' Pirate's Life from their Peace Thru Vandalism albums, maybe EP? Seven puddle. The original Disneyland e-ticket was the ticket for the best kind of rides, the biggest and best rides. You needed an e-ticket. LSD 25. Doesn't mean he didn't take it. Again, if you've been on the ride, grab your grog. Locked inside the ride. Is this for real? They're like, the distinction can blur for some people. Never the case for me, neither visually nor cognitively, but still, some very enjoyable, amusing, and yes, tripped out experiences, again, but nothing like that. But again, there are several lines there like, oh, I don't want to buy a bride, but this is a part where like you go through and they're in this like kind of pirate, like, you know, port like town, and you know, basically there's like, they're selling like brides, like, you know, on the like riverside and so on. So yeah, there's like multiple references to like parts of the ride as it used to exist. Again, my understanding is that it's been changed, and even if some of the like room areas have a similar sort of like narrative part in the story, they've been changed to reflect those movies. So again, I haven't been there since that. But like I said, it's, you know, it's one of the Vandals like calling cards from their early like period. Classic tune, and again, as someone who's had, again, maybe not that experience, but who's, you know, gone through the same hallucinogenic Disneyland experience in another respect, or like in a more general respect, I have a special like sympathy for this song. So yeah, let me know what you think of the tune. Let me know if there's another song on either of these albums that you'd like to see a reaction to. I do enjoy pretty much all of this double LP compilation. It is really fantastic, and again, that's not to say that there isn't later Vandals stuff that I like, or later Vandals stuff I like. I mentioned before the album Live Fast Diarrhea. I am a fan of that album. I can't find the disc though. I said when I reacted to Master Race, like, oh, I have that. Well, I have the case. I don't know where the disc is, so yeah, for now, I'm not sure if I can react to that. I'll see if I can replace it in an economical way, but yeah, if there is anything else on either of these albums that you'd like to hear a reaction to, do let me know. Other than that, I will see you next time. Peace.